With the Institute for Health and Human Potential. Very excited to be here with you, partnering with the Institute for Performance and Learning to deliver this webinar today. Thank you for joining. We're going to be starting in a couple minutes as some people come on. In the meantime, we've got a very special guest with us. So with us we have Carrie Dobsovich from Allstate Canada. She's a learning consultant there, and we'll do a proper introduction of her in a moment. But where I wanted to start out is, Carrie, the topic today is performing under pressure. What are some of the pressure situations that you see, your leaders facing at Allstate?
Hello, and thank you for having me. I think what we're dealing with a lot, and we're probably not unlike any other organization out there, is the whole idea of doing things more with less, and also doing things faster, trying to be quicker to market, trying to be more responsive to customers and clients, and having numerous different things going on at once. So everyone, if you ask anyone around here how they are, the first thing they'll say is they're busy. And I find that as that progresses, and that happens more often, those are creating those real moments of pressure where people are unable to maybe perform or be the person they want to be at that moment because so many things are demanding their time.
Yeah, and we hear that a lot, and something that kind of gets layered on is this idea of multiple priorities. So I've got all this stuff to do, but I've got dotted line, I've got 3 managers, different expectations and priorities. That just adds even more pressure.
Right, absolutely.
And then throw in change, and it's a real recipe. People are feeling under pressure. So, what have you seen, and not just at Allstate, but in your career? What's the impact when leaders or people don't handle pressure well?
Well, when they don't handle pressure well, I think that's when people find they're unable to really make that connection with their employees, to really engage and have their employees engaged in what needs to be done. And you're just not able to meet the goals in the way that you want to meet them. So things can still get done. They're just not getting done in the most productive, engaging, motivating way. And it just tends to be barriers that get put in front of you that you really struggle to get over, instead of working with people and having people work for you to be able to move those things ahead.
Yeah, there's a real impact on engagement. Well, tell you what, we're going to save the question, the obvious one of what does it look like when leaders are handling it well.
Okay.
So Jane, why don't we officially start the webinar, and then we'll get right back into the content after a couple of introductions.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Bill. Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Jane Duffy, and I'm with the Institute for Performance and Learning. We're excited to have you here for us today for the webinar, Performing Under Pressure, Doing Your Best When It Matters Most. Our speakers today are Bill from the Institute for Health and Human Potential and Carrie from Allstate Insurance Company of Canada. So just before we get started, I'd like to mention a couple of housekeeping items. First, I'd like to direct you to the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. This is where you'll find a question and answer area. It's just below the audio area, and it's labeled questions. This is where you can ask questions throughout the session, and we'll do our best to answer them as we go, or save some of them to the end. And if you do have some questions that we don't get a chance to address, we'll provide you with some contact information for you at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over the reins to Bill and Carrie to begin the session. Enjoy.
Great, thanks, Jane. The last thing I'll add is, for those of you that can see our videos, if you're feeling like they're in the way of the screen, you can find the layout button and click left, and it'll kind of move them over to the left-hand side of the screen, and then you can even size them. So we like to have the video so you can see us, but I know sometimes it can get in the way of the screen. All right, so quick introductions. I'm Bill. I'm one of the partners at the Institute for Health and Human Potential. We're a research and learning institute. I speak and train on the topics of performing under pressure and emotional intelligence. One of the things that people find interesting about me is that I have degrees in mathematics and computer science from Waterloo University, which, Carrie, you're smiling because that is not your typical path into teaching this kind of work. So, I tend to take a bit more of an analytical and logical approach to it, as maybe many of the people that everyone on the line has in classrooms do. Carrie is a learning consultant at Allstate senior learning consultant, excuse me, at Allstate Canada. Most importantly, she's responsible for the design and facilitation of their management and leadership curriculum, and partnered with Allstate, and they've incorporated, IHHP's leadership training. She is certified to deliver our emotional intelligence training, and we thought we'd have her join to give some kind of best practices and real context for, what's it like actually, trying to develop these kinds of competencies in leaders. What are some best practices and things that she learned? So, Carrie, thanks again for joining.
Thank you.
All right. So, where we want to start out with, because I'm kind of a data person, we did a survey beforehand, and thank you to all of you who filled out the survey. We got lots of great response. So why are we here today? Well, there's a business impact of the pressure that we're feeling. 83% of people agreed or strongly agreed that mismanaged pressure affects their managers and their leaders' ability to lead people effectively. Carrie, you hadn't actually seen the statistic. That's exactly what you were describing at the beginning.
Well, that
how about
worked
the
out well.
personal impact? Yeah. I love it when a plan works.
Yeah.
The personal impacts, 74% of people agreed or strongly agreed that pressure affects their ability to meet deadlines, produce quality work, and perform at their best. And for those of you that know statistics, numbers like 83% and 74% are very high. So everyone's experiencing a lot of pressure. For our book, Performing Under Pressure, which I'm proud to say is a New York Times bestseller, we did a study of 12,000 people. And here's some of the things we heard. Every day at work, I feel like the pressure, I feel like I'm being squeezed like an orange. I believe it's actually making us less productive because we are trying to do too much. We're having a hard time meeting customer timelines, and the quality of work is sometimes subpar. And Carrie, for those that just joined, you were talking about the impact on relationships and people.
Right. Yeah, it definitely, when people are under pressure, they don't interact the same way with others. They tend to be very inward looking. It's all about them, and you can't make those connections that you need to make, both from engagement and motivation, but also just to that kind of one-on-one connection to make sure that things are moving along the way that they should, or have that, to this point, one of the points here, really being able to deliver something of quality.
Yeah, great. And the beauty is what we're actually going to look at today is some of the brain science of why does that happen? Why do we become inwardly focused? Why do we miss stuff? Why can't we innovate and perform as well when we're feeling that pressure? So what are your takeaways for this session? Well, number one, we hope you'll recognize that your pressure moments, those key moments in key situations, will have a negative impact on your performance in your career if it's not managed. And to learn that, two, the good news is you can learn to manage those pressure situations. I'm going to share 3 insights and 3 strategies from the book. We're going to look at your emotional brain under pressure and talk about a strategy, what we call the SOS. I'm going to look at your cognitive brain under pressure and share a crisis versus opportunity strategy. And finally, we're going to talk about your conversations under pressure and approaching the last 8%. And of course, another key takeaway is to learn from our esteemed guest, Carrie. All right, so we're talking about this idea of pressure and pressure moments, but what exactly is a pressure moment? And the one thing I want to make clear is it isn't just an individual moment. It's also a situation. It could be a big project that spans over 3 months that we're responsible for. It could be a sales target. Now, not that many of you are in sales on this line, but you get the idea, or it could be a training curriculum that you're rolling out over a period of months. So there's pressure moments and there's pressure situations. In the book, we define pressure moments as having 3 distinct characteristics. 1 is when the outcome is important, 2 is when the outcome is uncertain, and 3 is when you are responsible for or being judged on the outcome. And if you think about it, if you take any one of these 3 away, it reduces the pressure. So if the moment or situation is not important, well, okay, I'll give that a try. If it's certain that it's going to go well, that's easy. And if we're not the ones being judged on or responsible for, someone else is, yeah, I'll pitch in, but it's not really going to impact me. So when all of those 3 things are in place, that's a pressure moment or situation. So I'd like each of you now to just take a moment and think about given this definition, what's a pressure moment or situation you are currently facing? And what I'd like you to do, because I want to make this interactive and get some input from all of you, if you could go to the chat area, so right below questions is the chat area, and just share. What are some of those, what comes to mind as you think of what are the pressure moments and situations that you're facing? And I'll put a little something here. So again, I'll ask you to go to the chat area and put in what are some of the pressure moments and situations that you're currently facing. Well, Carrie, while they're figuring out where the chat area is, we talked about that one that you're facing fairly presently.
Yes, being being a guest on a live, yes, that's definitely something I classify as a pressure moment for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's important, right? It's uncertain.
Very uncertain.
And you're being, we're always being judged, right? But there's some key people that are on this webinar as well, aren't there?
Yes, I believe there's some very important people from Allstate Corporation in the U.S. that are going to be attending, and my team, my boss, and a few of my coworkers will be attending as well. So.
Okay, so I think we do have some responses, but I see here that they're in the question area, which is fine. I just have to figure out how to open the question area so I can read those. Have to prioritize input and transform it into a curriculum. Absolutely. What's the access code? Wow, that's a lot of pressure. Training my team on a yet-to-be-launched product. Boy, talk about a lot of uncertainty. Here's a couple more. Revamping a program to function better and be effective for the participants. Yeah, and great examples, folks. And in all of those, again, you know, it's important what we're doing. It's uncertain. I mean, one interesting thing about the third point you are responsible for, being judged on the outcome, that feeling of being judged by others is processed in the same part of your brain as physical pain. That's why it literally feels painful to be in a situation where you're on the spot. Okay, so in terms of, you know, how do we help, how do we gain some insight about how our brain responds under pressure, there's really two parts to your brain. There's your emotional brain and your thinking brain. And we're going to cover both of these. In our training curriculum, the first part is what we call the science of emotional intelligence. The second part is from the book. That's doing your best when it matters most. And the third part are conversations under pressure, and that we call the 3 conversations of leadership. So again, we'll be walking through some key content in each of these 3 areas. So right now, let's talk about emotional intelligence. And some of you may be familiar with it, but in terms of some data we gathered, only 14% of you agreed or strongly, actually only 14% of you strongly agreed that you are able to receive criticism without becoming defensive. Wow. I mean, and that's totally natural. I mean, we all, again, we're being judged. It's very, very difficult to receive critical feedback. What's important to understand is that that defensive response isn't coming from your cognitive brain, isn't coming from your best thinking. It's coming from that emotional part of your brain. So we're just going to quickly share, there's 2 parts to your brain, as we mentioned, the complex thinking brain and the emotional feeling brain. Your complex thinking brain is where your IQ is. That's where you have all of your best abilities. It's also where your working memory is. And working memory is what gives you access to your IQ and all your knowledge. The cognitive part of your brain thinks and reflects, makes decisions, strategizes, you know, here's input about that program you're developing, you know, has a vision for how we should roll it out, gets feedback, it does all of that big picture, prioritizing and decision making. So that's your cognitive brain. Then there's your emotional brain, and many of you may have heard of this small almond-sized part of the brain called the amygdala. That's your fight, flight, or freeze center. And it responds and reacts. It doesn't cognate or think. It simply responds based on emotional learning and memory. It has a negativity bias. So in a pressure moment, it's going to assume the worst. And it operates 100 times faster than your neocortex. And this is important because we're all wired that when something triggers us, when we're in a pressure moment, our emotional brain is going to react first. That's why we have that little defensive reaction. Carrie, what other kinds of reactions, do you hear about in classes from people when their emotional brain or their amygdala is responding?
Yeah, I find more so people are talking about a flight response, really wanting to get out of there, get out of the room, get out of the situation, more so than a fight. So they'll shut themselves down, they'll stop talking, and they just want to get it over with, and that's when they'll find themselves in a situation that by doing nothing or saying nothing, they agree to something that they don't want to agree to.
Yeah.
And, and I find, when you look at the idea of the amygdala with the negativity bias, one of the things we do in business is we sit down and we look at a situation and go, okay, what's worst case scenario? Well, the minute we start looking at all the negatives, we're not working from that place where we get all of the better ideas. And so I think it's just a funny way of looking at it until you go through something like this. You think a good thing, but actually you're kind of stopping yourself from moving forward.
Yeah, I love that point, because the emotional system, the amygdala, doesn't differentiate between real and perceived. So if we're constantly looking at what could go wrong, that emotional system gets us ready to fight that, because if you're in the jungle and you know there's a tiger and you hear wind rustling in the bushes, you assume the wind is also a tiger. So we're wired that way. So what happens is there's a chemical response. So when we see something as a crisis or something triggers us and we start to shut down, there's a reason for that. The amygdala releases chemicals into our brain that reduces the working memory, reduces our ability to think complex, and moves us toward default behaviors. When that happens, we call that an amygdala hijack, because the amygdala can literally hijack your best cognitive thinking and move you toward default behaviors that typically are not skillful. So the hallmarks of a hijack is, first you'll experience it in your body. Chest tightens. My hands will shake a little bit. Carrie, how do you know when you're having an amygdala response?
I always tell the people in the sessions, it's like I get a rush of heat that starts, from my stomach right up through into my face, and you can just feel this overwhelming thing happen all at once.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of your thinking, cortisol floods the neocortex, which decreases our ability to think complex thoughts. Now, by the way, often that's a moment in which you want to be able to see options, you want to be able to innovate, you want to be able to strategically think, but you can't because you've lost working memory. This is where we also default to self-protection. The amygdala is there to protect us. So, Carrie, you talked about that earlier. In pressure moments, it's hard for people to really connect and be empathetic and, show that the other person's opinion matters because we're more focused on ourselves. And you've all had this experience. We become fixated on that perceived threat, whether it's real or not. So this idea of an amygdala hijack, again, in the class, people really work through understanding it, but then really applying it. How does that apply to me? By the way, if unaddressed, the amygdala will, impair your best thinking capacities for 18 minutes, which is, Carrie, why it's always 20 minutes later when you think of a good comeback,
exactly.
Right? You have a difficult conversation.
Back in the car, you've left the meeting, and you're down having coffee, and you think, oh, I should have said that. That's exactly why.
Yeah, yeah. This is also the same part of the brain that says, we'll avoid that. Don't step in. Don't give feedback. Don't tell somebody something they might not want to hear. Don't share an idea. Somebody might criticize it. So that flight response is driven by the same system. Okay, so we want to do a little application for all of you. So, okay, we'll use the Q&A area. So in the Q&A area, list one or two. What are your default behaviors when you're emotionally triggered? You've heard some of ours. I want you to disclose. By the way, I won't say anyone's name. I'll just share the actual, so you're not disclosing too much. But yeah, please do share what some of your default behaviors are. Okay. I'm still having a little trouble with this. Show answer question. Okay. Oh, I'm seeing a whole bunch more. I'm sorry. I'm having a little trouble with the. Oh, become very quiet, avoiding. Yep, Carrie, you're right. We're seeing a lot of that. clenched teeth and racing thoughts. Yep. Clamming up won't contribute, very common. Resistant to change, I really like that somebody put that. We do a lot of work in the area of change. In fact, we have a white paper called All Change is Personal, because most organizations miss this emotional part of change. Yeah, you know, sort of focused on the tasks, not connecting. So thank you, everyone. I love the disclosure. That's all the stuff, and it's natural. We all experience that. All right, so what do we do? So we all, at times, can have this emotional experience. The chemicals reduce our working memory. We're kind of ready, or fight, or we're fleeing. What can we do? So Carrie knows well the strategy that we discuss in our training program called the SOS, which stands for Stop, Oxygenate, and Seek Information. And I'm going to walk through each of these steps. And again, these aren't rocket science, but now you have some clarity on when and how to do it. So when you feel that reaction, you know, Carrie, whether it's the heat in the face or the tightened, you know, chest or the hands shaking, whatever your response is, you want to stop, disengage from the trigger. Bring awareness back to your autonomic response. So you're trying to engage your neocortex to disconnect from the emotion, from the amygdala. And that can look like, if you're on your own, you know, write that email, put it in the draft folder, don't send it, and then go and get a glass of water. Get up and go for a walk, right, Carrie?
That's right. Yeah, we always talk about, you know, the email thing is one of the biggest obstacles we have because it's so immediate and it's so hard to take back once you hit send. So we talk about that a lot, to really think through, put it in draft, or just, you know, send it to yourself. So in case you do hit send, it goes to you. It's definitely a management thing.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, you think about the business impact of all those emails where maybe somebody's reacting a little bit, and then there's responses, and then, you know, and not only is there wasted productivity, but typically, you know, you don't get to the best solution that way.
Right, exactly, and you may send a response thinking it's no big deal, and you're triggering somebody else, and so you start this whole chain reaction. If it's more than just between you and one person, reply all is not always your friend, so it can start a whole thing that goes on.
Yep, exactly. And by the way, the email also has the flight response, which is someone who has a good idea, someone who has valuable input doesn't, because they're getting triggered and they're like, oh, I don't want to, you know. Okay, so we want to disconnect. If let's say you're on a webinar, on a conference call or something, or you're in a meeting and you can't just get up and walk away.
Right.
There's some little things you can do, like taking a drink of water.
Like I just did.
Carrie, what are some of the things that what are some of the strategies you hear?
Well, when I just accidentally shut myself down from this webinar, it's a lot to do with that idea of just thinking and not talking. For me personally, I tend not to listen. I tend to want to just jump in. So I literally open and close my mouth. It's a physical thing that I do to stop myself in that moment. So.
Yeah, yeah. So again, little things like that. If your palms will actually start, your fingers will actually start to curl as you start to get a little triggered. You probably won't get into a full fist, but open your palms. I'll just open my palms and relax them on my lap. So there's a lot of little things you can do to do that disconnect. All right. As you are disconnecting, as you are stopping, you then want to oxygenate. That is the intake of a large amount of oxygen. That decarbonizes your blood, which has the physiological effect of getting oxygen back to your brain and reducing the impact of the chemicals the amygdala has released. So you're fighting chemistry with chemistry. So try it right now. Just take a deep conscious breath, everyone. If you do nothing else as a result of this webinar, but the next time you get that email or that person says that thing or that jerk cuts you off on the highway, you just stop and take a deep breath. You'll be amazed at how much of your better self you get back, how more able you'll be able to deal with pressure. All right, the last part of the SOS strategy, now that you've got some of your thinking mind back, you want to seek information, start with yourself. Because as Carrie said, I'm the same way. I'm typically jumping to conclusions. I'm ready to tell everybody, you know, what my solution is. First of all, is this a real or perceived threat? Is it wind or tiger? Because remember, we amplify the negative. Some perspective. We call it the rule of sixes. Will this matter in 6 months, 6 weeks, or even 6 hours or 6 minutes? As we're getting a little bit more of our cognitive thought back, what's the impact I want to have in this moment? You know what? I do want to be seen as someone who can step in and give an idea, give some feedback. I'm just now putting myself in a position where I can be more effective at it.
Yeah, definitely.
What
one
is
of
my
the
best?
favorite,
Yeah, go ahead, Carrie.
No, I was just going to say one of the favorite questions is that will this matter in 6 months, 6 weeks? That's one that we find as soon as that goes up on a slide, everybody just goes to that because that really is about perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the amygdala is there to protect us. It's fighting whatever the thing in the moment is, the thing that person said, or the change I don't agree with, or I wasn't included in that. And it reacts and responds as though we're physically fighting something. And that's not our best place to operate, to lead from, to collaborate, to innovate, all those things that's expected of us, to just multitask, to perform tasks, to think strategically. All that stuff we get asked to do is impaired if our emotions are even a little bit triggered. So Carrie, what have you seen in your organization in terms of what you hear from the classroom or after the classroom of people applying this particular tool strategy?
Yeah, this tool is one that people struggle with it initially, especially with the stop, the idea that they can actually stop themselves from the hijack going to a full-blown one. But I probably get the most feedback from participants after the fact with regards to this strategy, where they'll write to me and I follow up with them and they'll write to me and say, you know what, I've been practicing this and it's really funny because it works. And I'm like, really? That's a good thing to know. But it is one of the ones that if you can put this in place, if you can get something easy for you to recall, because it's got to be personal, it's got to be something that works for you, it is probably one of the most effective things to help you get over that initial hijack and get you back in the game the way you want to be.
Can I tell you something really amazing? I just experienced it because for some reason I couldn't get the questions to open up.
Yeah.
And so here I am trying to run a webinar, trying to see the questions, and I know where they are. I've used this platform a million times. And when we stopped and took the deep breath, all of a sudden I saw how to open up. I saw, oh, there's the button.
Yeah.
Like my brain was literally, and by the way, I've been practicing this for like 14 years, so.
Yeah. And
it does take,
I tell everybody, this is not an overnight thing. This is every day, every situation, every opportunity that you get to practice it, it will get better, and you will get more comfortable using it, where it will become just the way you do things.
Yeah, yeah, and I love your point about people kind of it's a kind of shift to think, wow, have control over some of those things. So if people think, oh, I'm just stuck with being the person who is defensive, or I'm stuck with being the person who doesn't step in, or we're not stuck with those default behaviors. In fact, our default behaviors are neural pathways in our brain, and it's like water running over rock to get grooved in. But if I can stop in that moment and try a new default behavior, try something different, suddenly that starts to become the new default behavior. We can learn. That's the great thing, is the amygdala can learn.
Yeah, it is. It's great.
So there's hope for all of us, folks that struggle at times with our emotional intelligence.
Just keep trying.
Yeah, yeah. Favorite quote of mine on the topic of emotional intelligence, Dorothy Neville, an English poet, said this: "The real art of conversation is not only to say the right thing at the right time, but to leave unsaid the wrong thing in the tempting moment."
That's great.
Isn't that great? You know what I love about that is she said that in 1913, 100 years ago, before text and social media and television and all that sort of stuff. By the way, one of the things, Carrie, you and I were talking about beforehand is, this work doesn't just apply in business.
No.
To many of us, that particular quote is probably more applicable in our personal lives than maybe in our work lives.
Yeah. Yeah, what I found with a lot of the participants is they'll say, we'll get talking about, how they react, and they'll go, well, I'm different at work than I am at home. And so the first question to that is, well, why do you think that is? And we find that people are pretty good throughout the day in a business setting of trying to keep themselves sort of reined in and not react. There's an expectation of how they should behave, but your mind and your brain can only do that for so long, and then they get home and they have, you know, a reaction that is not what they hoped it would be with the people that they love. But it's really around having a really positive effect in all aspects of your life, and I get the most feedback with how much this impacts their home life versus their business life.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, what happens is the cortisol builds up over the day as there's stressful things, and we're feeling the pressure, and we're not responding, and we don't realize that we get home, and we're still on high alert. So we're more likely now to trigger. My wife, I used to have to spend time in traffic, and she would say, I don't want to be near you if you get home and it was a bad traffic day.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I shouldn't have that impact on her just because I had a bad traffic day.
Yeah.
So I learned, I used to practice the SOS in the car, driving home. And she noticed it. She noticed that after a while I got home in a better place. All right, Carrie and I could talk about emotional intelligence all day. It's actually a 2-day training program that we're summarizing. We also have a 1-day version and a half-day version of it. So there's many different options. But as you can tell, it's very rich content. We want to share with you kind of all the different elements of the curriculum and your brain under pressure. So now we want to look at more, we looked at the emotional brain, now we want to look more at the thinking brain. And here's a little bit of data. 62% of people agreed or strongly agreed that when their manager is under pressure, they see them moving toward crisis as opposed to opportunity thinking. Again, 62% is very high. If 62% of leaders in an organization are reacting to pressure by seeing it as a crisis, that's going to have a huge impact on the organization. And there's some physiology to this. So the crisis thinking not only will trigger the amygdala, oh my gosh, what if it doesn't work out? What if they don't like it? What if they don't, you know, all that. But there's another impact. And again, our default cognitive appraisal, we call it, so how we appraise an event, a change, something said, an email, a situation, is to view it as a crisis. And that actually elicits fears of failure in that moment. It impairs short-term memory. It literally narrows our focus and we become mentally rigid. And it ultimately saps our energy. And there's a physiological reason why this happens. So all of us have many blood vessels running in our body. And blood vessels are surrounded by smooth muscle. You can see there in the picture. When we are calm, when we are seeing things as opportunities, the blood vessels are dilated and a lot of oxygen is getting to our brain. When we see pressure as a crisis, though, noradrenaline is released into our blood system, which constricts the blood vessels, allowing less oxygen to get to our brain. Now, that can combine with the amygdala triggering, but sometimes, you know, the emotional brain's out of it, and it's just this constricting of the blood vessels, less oxygen getting to our brain, which is what impairs the short-term memory, which is what makes us more mentally rigid. And ultimately, that lack of oxygen can lead to things like fatigue, like tension headaches. And so there's both a business and personal impact of the way our system works. Well, here's the good news. You're not stuck with that crisis thinking. You have a choice. When you see pressure as more of an opportunity versus a crisis, the opposite happens. Adrenaline is released into our blood system, which dilates our blood vessels, which gets more oxygen back to our brain, more oxygen back to our muscles. So by the way, if you're performing any sort of, physical activity, it's incredibly helpful. But typically at work, we're not, lifting weights, so we want that oxygen back to our brain. So that is what allows the oxygen to get back to our brain. We can think more clearly, and see more options. So strategy number 2 for you is shifting from crisis to opportunity thinking. And I'm going to ask Carrie first. So I'm going to ask each of you to think about the pressure moment you described earlier. So Carrie, for you, as you were preparing for this, what were you saying to yourself as you were kind of seeing it as a crisis, and what were you saying as you were seeing it as an opportunity to be on this webinar today? Oops, sorry.
Well, I mean, when you're looking at crisis of being uncertain and in a place of being judged, obviously you're going to be nervous about it. But the opportunity really is, you know, to get to work with different people. You and I haven't worked together before. We've gotten to know each other over this year. I've met some other people from, you know, our Allstate family that have contacted me when this first got out there. So, and it's really an opportunity for me to talk about something that's truly exciting. I mean, I've been 2 years, I guess, working with the program, and I still get very excited about it, and I still think it's really wonderful, and I'm really privileged to be able to bring this to the organization and be the one that they chose to bring it out to the leaders. So in and of that, that's where the opportunity is. Talk about something that I find exciting and I find useful, and try and focus on that as opposed to what's everybody going to think of me, because I have no control over that. So
yeah, and I mean, it has such a great impact both on a personal level for a situation like this. It also, from a leadership perspective, and again, everyone's a personal leader, so regardless of whether you have formal management responsibility, when there is a tense situation, if you can start to notice yourself and others moving toward crisis thinking, you can start to shift and say things, okay, well, you know, how could we leverage this? How could we look at this differently? What are some things we could do to, you know, find solutions, and start shifting people out of that crisis thinking into opportunity thinking? Leaders in particular, you want to be very careful that your crisis thinking doesn't infect, you know, your team, that you are, and again, this isn't about minimizing, it's about recognizing the challenge, but not focusing on the negative, focusing more on the opportunity to overcome the challenge.
Absolutely.
Yep. Okay, so for each of you on the line, if you could, for your pressure moment, how can you see it as an opportunity? And I'm going to ask you to go back to the Q&A area and just fill in some thoughts. For the pressure moments that you're facing, the ones you defined, how could you see it as more of an opportunity? And I appreciate, we had lots of great, I finally found them. We had lots of great responses previously, so I've now found them. Okay, am I seeing them? Oh, there I am struggling again. Okay, I'm having a little trouble with the chat area. I think some other people may be too. So we'll move on from that. But hopefully, what you're all getting the idea of is that how you think about and perceive your pressure moments and situations has a huge impact on your ability to perform. And it has a physiological impact and a brain impact. And so applying the strategy can really help you. And if you combine it with the SOS, it's very powerful. One of my pressure moments about a year ago when the book and this content was new is I was asked to deliver this to 100 US Marines. Now, I'm not a military guy, so I'd be nervous delivering my emotional intelligence program that I've been doing for 14 years. Never mind something new. And I know all of you on the line, you know that when that's new training program, you're like, what slide comes next? What's the point I'm supposed to make here? So I was I'm the most nervous I always remember driving over to the Fort Sheridan in Chicago, being the most nervous I've ever been. And by the way, my first thought was, I should probably apply some of the techniques I'm about to teach, right? Because we should really be modeling this stuff, right, Carrie?
Yeah, it's hard. That's the hard thing.
It is. So first thing was deep breath. Second thing was, oh my gosh, I'm totally in crisis thinking. I'm thinking they're not going to like this, they're not going to like me, you know, and I don't know what Marines do when they don't like a presenter, but it can't be good. And suddenly I shifted to opportunity. I took the deep breath, I shifted to opportunity thinking, and wow, what a great opportunity to serve these people who serve our country in a really amazing way. And wow, if it goes well, or when it goes well, I'm going to get to talk about the story. And guess what? It did go really well, and they've invited me back. And you know, I now get to say I work with the U.S. Marines, and so it was always an opportunity. But I was definitely in crisis thinking there for a little while.
Sure, and Bill. Oh, yeah. Sorry, Bill. It's Jane. I can read through some of the feedback for how people see this as an opportunity.
I don't know why I'm missing them. That would be lovely.
Sure. So someone here had indicated it was an opportunity to think outside the box and to brainstorm. Another good one was develop a default attitude of opportunity thinking. And how we can use it as an opportunity to show empathy.
For
I
sure.
think it's great. And also to focus on the desired end result. So it gives an opportunity to refocus and also to understand how to better manage pressure moments. Just a few of the top ones that pop through.
Thank you. By the way, I just figured out why I can't see the questions, because I had them sorted by question, not sorted by when they were received. You see that as soon as I talk about this being an opportunity, suddenly I can think clearly again. You're seeing my brain, do this in action. It's amazing.
I think the idea of crisis and opportunity you had mentioned as leaders of people and how to really get them. To me, it's really about you have a choice. You can either scare people or you can excite them. So what do you want to do with it? A crisis is going to scare them. An opportunity could excite them. And so how can you turn that around and re-engage them into getting something done differently moving forward?
Yeah, and by the way, I love that point. We didn't plan this, but it absolutely ties in to the next part in the curriculum, which is our conversations under pressure. Because when you have to step into a difficult conversation, you've got to give somebody difficult feedback, roll out a change they don't agree with, say no to something. By design, they're ready to see it as a crisis. Their emotional system is defensive. And so in order to be effective at these kinds of conversations that we all know organizations need to have, we need to be able to hold people accountable. We need to be able to point out mistakes. We need to be able to give great performance feedback, right? Organizations need that. In order to do it, that's why the managing the emotional brain and managing the thinking brain are the first two parts of the curriculum. Because if you're not managing those, then these conversations just become derailing. They become demotivating. 62% of people in our survey agreed that in their organization, people tend to avoid the hardest part of difficult conversations. There is an epidemic right now of avoidance of addressing really key issues. And it comes from a good place, people don't want to hurt people's feelings, they don't want to derail them, they don't want to undermine them. But it's causing this, so much lack of performance and accountability and innovation. And here's what sometimes can happen. We all know people sometimes avoid a conversation completely, but there's something that's actually even a little bit more insidious, which is what we call the last 8% conversation. And what do I mean by that? Well, you've all probably had this experience. I know I have. You get into a conversation, you make it most of the way through, you get 85%, 90, 92% of the way, when all of a sudden, the other person starts reacting emotionally. They're either defensive, or they've had this person, they're just staring at you. Because they're completely in flight mode, they're totally shut down, or they're succumbing to crisis thinking. Then our response, which is natural, is now we start to back off. And we don't say what really needs to be said in that conversation. And then most people leave the conversation thinking, okay, well, you think this, well, I kind of almost got there. The other person thinks the conversation happened. And then guess what? A month later, the behavior's not changing. The accountabilities aren't getting better. The goals aren't, because the conversation didn't really happen. And if you think about all the things we just learned about the emotional brain and about our thinking brain, you can understand why we tend to avoid those conversations. That's why it's so important to manage those parts of your brain. So a third strategy, by the way, maybe we even get before the strategy. So Carrie, being a practitioner of emotional intelligence and understanding our work, tell me why it kind of makes sense for emotional intelligence and the thinking under pressure programs to be a prerequisite for conversations.
Right. Well, one of the key learnings out of the emotional intelligence is around emotional management and emotional connection. So being able to not only manage yourself in these situations, crisis situations or pressure situations, but how to connect to somebody else by putting yourself over to think what's important to them first, to be empathetic, to really listen, to really be willing to open yourself up to what they have to say and what their perspective is. And if you start from there, if you have those skill sets, if you're practicing that, if you're working toward making a true emotional connection, then it allows you to go and have that 8% that we all seem to stop and miss.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have the conversation in a way that you're doing your best not to trigger someone, not to put them into fight or flight mode, and it allows the full conversation to take place. So you both walk away knowing exactly what was said and what needed to be said.
Yeah, yeah. I love your point because, you know, when there's that connection, if you think of your best relationships at work, the people that, you know, are almost friends and maybe sometimes do become friends, wow, that's a lot easier when you know you've got to go into one of those conversations because there's trust, there's respect. And by the way, a lot of times it's those conversations that build the trust and respect. The worst thing you can do is avoid them. So strategy number 3 is approach your conversations because organizations need people to have these conversations. Approach the last 8%. Prior, here is sort of a part of the solution, make sure you're clear about what it is you need to say before the conversation ends. So that as you feel yourself hitting that 92% and starting to avoid, you can be really clear and say, no, I need to let the person know that the way that they behaved in that meeting had an impact on me, and, you know, I want to help them get better. I want to, you know, develop our relationship. So be clear about what it is you need to say. Apply your SOS. The seek information is what Carrie was talking about. Really think about, you know, what's going on for them? What's their perspective? What are some of their challenges? You know, how can you connect this to not so much make it about you, but start on their side of the bridge is a topic we use in the conversations program, or a model. We typically tend to start these conversations from our side of the bridge. Here's what I saw, and here's what impacted me, and here's what I need, and here's what, versus starting on the other side of the bridge. Manage your own thinking. So if you go into this thinking, oh my God, this person's going to react, they're not going to like it, it's going to be a crisis, but I got to get it done anyways, I can tell you how it's going to go. Versus, hey, this is an opportunity to give a person important feedback, to solidify a relationship, to build, you know, that then becomes a better place for you to operate from. Carrie, you know, one of the concepts I didn't bring up here just for time, but we have a few extra minutes here, is the idea of intention and impact.
Oh, yeah.
I know. Isn't that great? Maybe just take a minute, kind of explain that, and then how clarifying your intention going into a difficult conversation can really help the other person manage their emotions and their thinking.
Okay, so the intention and impact theory was really, that was my personal aha when I first went through this. It's the idea that we know exactly what our intentions are. We know we have good intentions. Nobody sets out at the beginning of the day to ruin someone's day or make them miserable. But as the day progresses, pressures happen, situations occur, we end up not being the person that we started out to be that morning, and the impact we have on someone else, how we make them feel, how our interaction with them makes them react to us, it ends up having a disconnect in a lot of circumstances. So one of the challenges we have is to make sure that what we hope to accomplish, what our intentions are, is actually matched by how the person is going to react. So we need to be very aware that we're going in with very clear intentions on the kind of conversation we want to have and what we hope to get out of it, and do it in such a way that we have that kind of positive impact on the person that we're interacting with.
Great. Yeah, so a bullet point I would add here then is, as you're going to step into approach the last 8%, clarify your intention. That lets the other person's emotional brain know, oh, I'm not in trouble, they don't hate me, they're just trying to help me get better, or they want our relationship to work really well. So state a positive intention. It also shifts them from crisis to opportunity thinking.
Right. And if your intention is their development or their betterment or to help them, then that is all about opportunity. The crisis doesn't exist then in the conversation.
Yeah. And even if it isn't, even if it's just one of those kind of tough, toxic relationships, I mean, you'd like relationship to be better. Nobody likes toxic relationships. That's the stuff that keeps us up at night. So to state, hey, you know what? I really want our relationship to be better. You know, and here's something that, you know, I've observed, and da-da-da-da, but that's just a way to, again, calm their emotional system and get them into opportunity thinking.
Right.
All right. Favorite quote? Oops. Did I just do that? Okay. All right. Have a little technical challenge. All right. And finally, step into the conversation. approach the last 8%. William Wrigley Jr. said, when two people in business always agree, one of them is unnecessary. These critical conversations they're absolutely critical. These difficult conversations are absolutely critical to an organization that wants to be a high-performing organization. All right, so as we come to the close, and we'll leave a little time for Q&A, I hope what you're taking away is, number one, that pressure, that you can overcome the derailing effects of pressure. And one of the things, by the way, we learned in the study is that most people take a haphazard approach to managing their pressure moments and situations. So they just go in hoping, whatever they've learned will work. What we're recommending is you become very proactive about identifying those pressure moments and situations, having insight, and using strategy so that you can be your best. So we shared the idea of the amygdala and the hijack and how that can, impair our best abilities, and the SOS strategy: stop, oxygenate, seek information. How your cognitive brain can focus on crisis versus opportunity thinking, and to shift, because that then opens the blood vessels and dilates, and we get more oxygen to our brain. And combining these two is a very powerful tool to then step into those difficult conversations under pressure. Approach that last 8%, right? Be that leader who can have, because if you think of exceptional leaders that you've worked with, they didn't avoid tough conversations. They stepped into them. Were they always perfect? Of course not. But something in the way they said it, how they approached it, left you feeling like, wow, I want to get better, not, oh, what an idiot, So if you can combine all these skills together, you become that kind of leader that can motivate and engage people. Carrie, what are some of the, kind of experiences you've seen in your organization as, leaders are applying some of the work that we've talked about here?
It's the one thing I think they're all finding is that it is a real process. It is practice. You joked earlier you've been teaching this and doing this for 14 years, and it's still something you have to remind yourself of.
My wife reminds me every day, by the way.
Every day. It truly is.
And my 13-year-old.
You have to make a conscious decision. Do you want to do things differently moving forward? Do you want things to turn out differently than what they were before? And we find that people are really trying. People in our organization are seeing where this can go. It's seeing them how it can help them. Huge feedback on how it's happening both personal and professionally. And there's a lot of the programs provide for common language, which also is very helpful. The idea of a hijack, pardon me, the idea of my SOS and those sorts of strategies. You can say that to somebody. Here's my SOS strategy. I'm going to try it in a meeting. Can you give me some feedback? Everybody starts to know what you're talking about. Everybody starts to understand what you're trying to achieve. And there's some real power in that, because even from a development, a director to a manager or a peer to a peer, to be able to say, here, try this. I think this would, if you strengthen this aspect, it would help you. It really adds a lot of power to the conversations that we're having nowadays.
Great, thank you. All right, so as we come to the close, and I got one more question for Carrie. We're going to sneak some more best practices out of her, but just the quick commercial on what does IHHP do, and more importantly, if you want to learn more, there is a great book. It is titled Performing Under Pressure. It is a New York Times bestseller, and it's available anywhere that you buy books. IHHP, as I said, we're a research and learning institute, and we like to take research and brain science, as you've seen, and put it into practical, applicable programs that can help people perform under pressure. We do keynotes, kind of 1-hour sessions. We do all the way up to half-day, full-day, one-day training programs. For those of you that are facilitators out there, we do offer certification. Carrie is one of our awesome certified trainers. We do have assessments and coaching. We do have public training programs. So again, if you were to go to our website and look at, right there on the main menu, you can, if your organization isn't bringing this in, you can come and see ours. We have a lot of great stuff in the resource center. Lots of blogs, white papers. One thing that I want to highlight is just 10 days ago, we launched a Women Under Pressure initiative. We were actually approached by an Atlanta businesswoman who saw our work and said, you know what, I think this is what women really need. You know, I attend a lot of women's leadership programs, and I think we need the tools and the strategies. And so there's a white paper there about why women's brains are unique, why we need more women in senior leadership positions, and how both men and women can perform effectively under pressure. So that's in our resource center on our website. There's also some pressure and EQ quizzes, so you can get a little kind of quick self-assessment on how you're doing. All right, Carrie, last question for you is, as you've now rolled this training out to and many other training programs as well, to over 200 leaders at Allstate, what are some of the best practices in terms of really making it stick, the sustainment piece? Because we all know a great training program will have some impact, but if it's sustained, then we really know it'll live.
One of the things we've tried to do is a bit of a follow-up program with the participants. I've just created a series of emails that goes out numerous times throughout the first year. Once they've attended the session, the very first thing the day after they attended, their managers get an email saying that their employees have attended, and encouraging and advising them to meet with them, talk about what they learned, etc. And then about every 3 months, they get another email. It highlights a particular skill that we talked about in the 2 days. And then at the 1 year, they get their congratulations 1 year anniversary email that goes out. And I'm always getting feedback every time an email goes out. Oh, I've tried this, or I've done this. And we do the 2-day program with the EI360, and the EI360 is just a wonderful tool for them. I'm always referring them back, and a lot of the participants will take things from there and build it into their personal development plans within the organization.
Yeah, I mean, many of you are familiar with 360 assessments. The EI one is so powerful in terms of giving people specific feedback on the exact kinds of competencies we're talking about here: impulse control, authenticity, coaching, and empathy. So thanks for reminding me to talk about that, because that is a really powerful tool. Great. Well, I want to say, first of all, huge thank you to Carrie for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure, and we just so appreciate the work you're doing there. You've got our baby, and you're treating it incredibly well at Allstate. And thanks to all of you for joining. We'll stay on a little bit after. By the way, I love this. I just saw this feedback. It says, great information, timely to help me communicate with my 13-year-old son. Oh my gosh, I have a 13-year-old daughter. This stuff works so well with kids and family. I mean, if all of you leave here and the only thing you do is apply it in your personal lives, we will have done our jobs, because, wow. Thank you for that, Miles. Thank you for that feedback. Jane, over to you to close things off. Oh, Jane might be on mute.
Okay.
And by the way, big thanks to IPL, the Institute for Performance and Learning, for partnering with us. We love this opportunity to work together. By the way, for those of you that are here that aren't IPL members, that are our clients, first of all, thank you for coming. Absolutely join, become a member. They share so much great information. There's so many great learning opportunities like this. There's their national conference. They have these chat things that go. Anyways, lots of great information. So if you're not a member, definitely join. And wondering if we lost Jane or if she's back. Okay, so the technology let us down there, but I then, on behalf of Jane and IPL, I will say thank you to everyone. If anyone has any additional questions, I'll stay on for a few minutes, but we're going to sign off. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and good luck performing under pressure.